morning and welcome to the show. Consider, if you will, this statement. I would have rather had to face cancer. Cancer, you see, is nobody's fault. The person speaking is a woman, and she said she would rather have to face a potentially life-threatening disease than to admit to herself that her husband may be having an affair with another woman. Now, if you're saying, oh, come on, it isn't that bad, you can get over it, maybe you should read a book called Woman versus Woman. And the author of that book, Shirley Eskapa, is here with us this morning. Also joining us is Burton Zaub, who is a lawyer specializing in divorce. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello.
There are women who would rather face the notion of a disease where nobody is to blame than to face an extramarital affair.
Oh, yes. I've talked with many wives who lost one husband to death and the other husband, if they'd remarried, to another woman. And each one told me actually it was easier having lost a husband to death because then they couldn't blame themselves. You see, when a man falls for another woman, the wife tends to blame herself, to denigrate herself, and to see herself as vastly inferior to that other woman.
So if all of this is being internalized, where does the conflict arise? I mean, if she's not looking toward the other woman and blaming the other woman, then what are we talking about here?
She blames herself. She also blames the other woman and goes to war with her. You see, why it's called the woman versus woman conflict is because each woman perceives the other woman to be her enemy. They don't perceive the man in the middle as the enemy, because that is the man they both want. That is why it's the woman versus woman conflict. And then, so the women who are in this conflict invent all kinds of ingenious strategies and techniques to counter the other woman in the hope of influencing the man.
How often do these techniques work, Burton? You've been in divorce law for 34 years?
That's correct. There used to be this hostility when a woman would come to retain a divorce attorney, the games people play kind of thing that Shirley's talking about. But I think Shirley is doing her interviews and doing her investigation at a point before a divorce lawyer might come into the picture. By the time people get to me, they've either done their games or they have decided not to do any games. In the old days, they used to sue for adultery. They would involve the other woman, or the other man would be involved. But that doesn't seem to happen anymore. It's years since any woman has tried to vent her spleen by involving the other woman in a lawsuit. And I've handled close to 3,000 divorces now. I find the internalization is the dangerous thing. Beautiful women sit before me, as I mentioned before. A Mrs. American can sit before me, and if her husband is having or has had an affair, she will think that she is ugly, and she will think that she has a terrible shape, and she will think the worst things about herself because she blames herself. And what Shirley has touched upon is some devices that women have created with marvelous nuances to deal with this. To try to save their marriage before they get to a divorce lawyer, I think. Is that right, Shirley?
Yes, and even if there's been a separation and the man has left home, they still go in for this sort of thing. Though sometimes, even after a divorce, the woman versus woman conflict continues because the former wife tries and very often succeeds in seducing her husband back again and becomes the other woman herself. This happens.
Why on earth, after you've gone through this with a man, would either woman want the man? I mean, really.
Well, somebody talked about the astonished heart. I think that it is an emotional thing and that there isn't really a rational explanation. A lot of women want the man because they want the marriage to continue. This is before the marriage has broken up, and that is why they fight so ingeniously and do so many wonderful things that in fact increase their husband's sense of self-respect, of respect for them.
Wonderful things, you say. Like what?
Well, take, for example, a wife who decided that her husband, who was living with his much younger woman, ought to have a little dose of reality injected into his life. So she sent all 4 children to stay with he and the younger woman. She also sent the dog. She included instructions about the kind of asthma shots the child needed. And she added a note saying, look, you don't need to hire a live-in babysitter because you've already got one. And by the way, all the children are on vacation. Now, those children didn't long, or rather the other woman didn't long withstand those other children. She surrendered at once. The point to stress, though, is that the marriage can emerge a much stronger, happier marriage, having survived a crisis of this sort.
We're going to have to pick that up way after we come back from a break. That's incredible. I mean, you can actually undermine someone else's relationship and make that into a happier marriage later on. That's amazing.
It's one of the great paradoxes.
We'll talk about that in just a moment. Stay with us.